Thank you for joining us today for 10 Minutes with the Artist, an episodic series that explores the professional practice and personal vision that guides artists. On today's episode, we're very proud to have Kimble Bromley, who exhibited recent works from his series Cuba at North Dakota State University's Memorial Union Gallery. Kimble's paintings and works on paper explore the island nation of Cuba during the 1990s, before it was opened up to North America. His works are colorful and expressive, but the tone of his works are quiet and nuanced. There are elements that speak to an inescapable past, and there is an isolation that resonates from piece to piece. But Kimble's work reaches for an honest interpretation that shares what is unique about the people, places, and things that make up Cuba. I'm Anthony Ferris, and this is 10 Minutes with the Artist. Thank you so very much, Kimble, for joining us today on 10 Minutes with the Artist. When people think of Cuba, they may think of certain symbols that sort of they identify with the island. Thinking maybe like rum, Cadillacs, maybe like cigars, right. So I was kind of curious if there were any symbols that you came across while you were traveling that you thought better represented that sort of sense of place.
Yeah, the image of Che, which originated from a photographer back in the 40s, I think, who took this image of Che, and it's been the popular one that you see on posters and around the world. He never really got any credit for it or made any money from it, but it's all over the city. There's a big kind of sculptural relief, 4 or 5 stories high on one of the sides of the building. You'd see it spray painted as graffiti on the streets, and you'd see it in museums on postcards. So I would say that image of Che, he represents the rebellion and the takeover.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I think of those sorts of symbols, I think of commodity, and you think of a person, which in some ways have become a commodity in a way. If you have seen T-shirts and
right. Well, I bought a T-shirt with Che on it
when
I was down there, so that was a commodity, right?
Yeah.
And I also purchased a Che $3 bill. Che's on their $3 bill, and $3 bill is always a joke here in the United States. So I paid $20 for a $3 bill in Cuba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. So in several of your works, I'm thinking about maybe like the General's Mangoes and the balcony piece. And there is this, you share with this viewer this sort of dark portal in a way. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering what you thought about those sort of like lost spaces in your pieces.
Well, I mean, you walk down the main drag in Havana and you're surrounded by these kind of images. It's I think back on when Havana was like in its heyday, it must have just been a beautiful city. I mean, much like many other Latin American countries, there's pastel pinks, blues, yellows, greens, all these wonderful colors, and it doesn't look like they've been painted for 50 years, and the buildings are falling apart. There'd be, these wooden doors that are 6 inches thick and big iron hinges on them, and the hinges are falling off, the wood's rotting, and at one time it just must have been fantastic. But I think especially the balcony piece kind of represents that. Here you have this kind of rundown place, but you've got this TV antenna, kind of a modern thing, and everybody has a TV. They had satellite dishes and things like that. And oftentimes you would walk down a street in Havana, and it would be like stereophonic sound of Fidel giving a speech. Even though when I was there, he was over in Spain at the time, he still gave speeches, and I guess he gave speeches several times a week. And everybody in Havana listens to Fidel's speeches. Or at that time they did.
Yeah. There's, in addition to the portals, I was looking at your works and I was thinking about this sort of idea of spareness in a way. There's a man sort of like set apart from the world and like a window and the General's Mangoes, and there's a man on the beach that's sort of separated. There's all these plates that are empty, And it's not necessarily that the works are like devoid of content. They are, but they're sort of like neatly separated, and sometimes there's just like one person in a work. Was there a reason why you were sort of making these decisions to sort of show that sort of like lonely feeling in a way?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I was just at the gallery looking at the painting of all the kids on the boulevard, and I was thinking, I've never painted so many people in one painting as that painting there. And so you were just at the opposite end of that. I think that the individuals in those paintings, it had to do with these individual moments. When I was on the beach, there were Europeans on the beach, and that one I think is called Beached European. And they kind of isolated the Europeans, and everybody else were isolated from the Cubans on that beach. It was a tourist beach. The only Cubans you saw on the beach were those picking up trash or maybe vendors. Otherwise, it was full of Europeans. And so that was kind of my statement there. The General's Mangoes, it was about, we met this individual whose great-grandfather was a general with Batista, and he had planted that mango, or that tree. And so I thought, I kind of painted the general, but at the same time, and the house that this guy lived in was the same house that his great-grandfather built. And so that, again, that was kind of like an individual story. So I wanted to kind of set that off in that way.
What sort of, because there's this sort of, like with the Beached European, like that's a different mood. And maybe it's not than the General's Mangoes. There's like some of them are kind of humorous, and some of them, like the General's Mangoes, I look at it and I just feel incredibly sad. And so I was curious what your mood of the work was. And then you look at some of the graffiti work, and it's very expressive, but it's also sort of angry in a way. What sort of mood were you sort of trying to convey?
Well, I think you're right. Each one of them, I was kind of after something different. The Beach European, I mean, even the title, kind of a humorous kind of a thing, and the guy on the beach is kind of like a stranded whale, So there was that kind of a humorous thing. The General's Mangoes was a little more serious. This guy talked very seriously about his grandfather and how he was proud of him being a general. State your question again.
Well, I was just kind of curious if there was a certain mood that you were trying to convey, much like that first question about the symbols.
I think each painting kind of offered a different story from being down in Cuba, because every day was a different story. Every day I would have different experiences. I'd see something new. I mean, that's always the joy of going to a foreign country, because it's like you land on Mars. I did speak a little Spanish at the time, but I wasn't quite fluent in it. But so you don't understand the language, you don't know where you're going. Things are different. They eat different food, and so I tried to capture some of those different experiences. One of the paintings I didn't have here that is actually in a dentist's office here in town is of a wall next to this place where Cubans would go and buy an ice cream cone. They would save a month's salary to be able to go there to buy this ice cream cone, and there would be a whole line around a whole city block waiting for an ice cream cone. But it was more of the social experience, and so it was that social experience. And at the same time, with the Cubans, for example, one of the guys I met there, I asked him, I says, so would you want to go back to the United States with me? And he goes, if you look at these 100 people out here, he said, 80 of them, if you ask them that, they'd want to go with you. But he said, if you asked 80 of them about Fidel, they'd all be 100% behind Fidel. And so I find those dichotomies, interesting. And so in these paintings, I tried to tell a little story with everyone, because there was a different story to be told.
Yeah. Well, at the end of our talk, we like to ask a few questions about your creative practice. So I was curious, what time of the day do you feel like you're most creative?
Probably starting about 2 o'clock.
In the morning?
No,
okay.
In the afternoon. 2 to 5. I like to have blocks of time. If I've got an hour here, an hour there, I can't get into it. I'm afraid that if I get all full of paint, I got to wash up right away. I don't want to have to worry about that. I just want to dive into it, and so that's kind of how I work.
Yeah.
And it works with my schedule. Over the years, that's what my schedule has allowed me to do. Is my mornings are taught. I teach classes, and the afternoons I have some blocked up time that are open. So just kind of gotten used to that.
Okay. Do you listen to any type of music or anything like that when you're making work?
Yeah, sometimes. If in the beginning, no, but once I have the idea and I'm working through some things and I'm kind of clear where I'm going, yeah, I listen to. I got a new. Let's see, what I get. Classical music. I listen to some Mozart, classical guitar.
We're really not allowed to name drop here, sir.
Oh, aren't we? All
I'm
right.
just kidding.
Country music. Listen to country. Willie Nelson. I got a new Willie Nelson CD, and so I play that.
I'll have to blurb that out.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there anything that you're reading right now?
Yeah, I just finished a book last night. Well, actually, 2 books in the last couple of weeks. Enchanted Madness, about Monet and Giverny, and it was really quite historical, talking about Manet and people surrounding him at the time. And then I just finished last night a book on Van Gogh's year in a mental health institution.
And then maybe the last question would be, what's next for you?
Well, I'm working on a painting right now that's been through about 5 different stages and is still fighting me, and I'm fighting back.
Okay. Fighting the good fight. Well, Kimble, thank you so very much for joining us today on 10 Minutes with the Artist, and I'd like to thank you all for your time and your interest in the professional practice and creative explorations happening here at North Dakota State University. So thank you, and for everyone here at the Memorial Union Gallery, keep creative.